thank you for being here. I'm so glad that Professor Frahm-Arp is here to give us a masterclass on how to present and how to prepare a paper for a conference. And maybe, I don't know if Maria wants also to tell a few things about also publishing a paper after a conference, if we have time. Let's see. I would like to introduce Professor Frahm-Arp. She has been the executive director of the Library Information Center at the University of Johannesburg since March 2018. She currently serves on the board of Sabinet and the South African National Library Information Consortium in South Africa, and internationally she serves on the Association for Commonwealth Universities Research Support Committee and the Europe, Middle East and Africa Executive Board of Online Computer Library Center. She's regularly asked to be a keynote speaker at national and international library conferences and webinars. And I know her quite well, and she's very passionate about her work and about working with her colleagues, with students, to create a friendly library where clients, and this is something that she wrote, are able to find the most relevant information easily by ensuring that the library uses the most up-to-date technology so that library staff have time to offer personalized attention to UG staff and students. Professor Frahm-Arp is an NRF-rated scholar, a C3-rated scholar, and does research on Pentecostal charismatic Christianities in South Africa. She is the sole author of 2 books and 28 articles and book chapters. She supervises students working on Pentecostal charismatic Christianities in Africa, gender and Christianity, as well as Anglican studies. And she is currently the editor of the Journal for the Study of Religion, which is the journal of the Association for the Study of Religion in Southern Africa. And I'm very, glad and happy that she's here today. She was my former president in the Association for the Study of Religion in Southern Africa, of which I am now the president. So I've worked with her quite a few years, and we worked together very smoothly, and it was a pleasure working with her. So I think, Maria, we can start with your masterclass, and please. So then we will have time to discuss things, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation, Elisabetta, and I love that we could actually get this off the ground. This is something we've talked about before, but we've never quite made it happen. So it's really exciting that we've been able to get this series of masterclasses going. So what I want to do today is look with you at what or how does one give a really good presentation at a conference. And I think the biggest thing I want to say is that giving a presentation at a conference is different to writing a paper. And I'm going to share with you what I call giving an ACE presentation, and I'll explain what that means. But I want you just to take a moment and just look at this very first slide that I've given you. This first slide tells you who I am, tells you what this is about. It also gives you a picture that evokes a particular image. So it gives you in that picture a sense of what this presentation might be about. Now, as we go through this, I am going to go over some ideas that I've put together, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So please do feel free that you can ask questions. If you want to interrupt me as we go, that's okay. And otherwise, save the questions for the end, and then we can talk through these different questions that you have. So for me, the most important thing to do with your presentation is that you want to tell a story. You want to captivate people. You've been doing research into something, and you want to share that research that you are passionate about with other people. Don't try and give us something in the most highfalutin academic language, which only half the people can understand. And don't give us something that is so steeped in references that we actually lose what it is you want to say. In a presentation, you've got maximum about 20 minutes, and you want to captivate your audience. And you want to captivate them by telling them something they don't know anything about. So tell them the story of your research and what you have found that was interesting in the work that you've been doing. So I talk about giving an ACE presentation. And I say this because it is a presentation that is accessible, that is clear, and that is engaging. So take note of what I'm saying here. I'm not saying a presentation that is the most highfalutin academic jargon you've heard. I'm not suggesting that you cover absolutely everything and jam-pack it full of information. What I'm rather saying is, give us an overview of your research, a bit like this picture of the savannah. You want to give us an overview of what you have discovered in a way that is accessible, that people who are not specialists in your field, but have an interest in religion broadly, can understand what your research was about. You want your research to be clear. So why did you do this research? What did you do? And what were the outcomes of the research that you did? And then you want your research to be engaging. And one of the ways to make something engaging is to speak to the things people are passionate about and interested in. And here the United Nations Development Goals are always a really good hook into making something engaging. Does your research in any way speak to sustainable development in our country or on our planet? So overall, you don't want to load it with all sorts of academic terms. You want to have something that is accessible, that is clear, and that is engaging. So be clear. Somewhere in your beginning of your presentation, you want to give us a one-sentence summary that tells us what is your paper about, and in another sentence, what is your main argument. So if you look at this presentation, I've been saying that this presentation is about giving a clear, accessible, and engaging presentation. So in one sentence, I can summarize what this presentation is about. And you need to be able to do the same thing with your research. Sorry, I'm not sure how I got muted. So for most people, this is really hard to do, because especially when you're in the depths of your research and you're finding out all these interesting things, it's really hard to summarize into one sentence exactly what your research is about. And so this is one of the tricks in giving a paper, especially if you are a master's or a PhD student. You're busy working on a whole lot of different things, and there's a whole lot of different papers that you could be giving. Try and focus in on one thing about your research that is interesting, which you want to share with the people that you're engaging with. You can't cover your whole PhD in one presentation, for example. The next thing is give us context. This is something that, especially when you only have 20 minutes, you kind of feel, well, I'm just going to waste time by telling people the context. I need to get into all the other stuff. But normally in a conference, the people that you are speaking to are not the experts in your field. So, for example, I might give a paper on talking about teaching Eastern religion. And the people sitting in the audience may all be people interested in teaching religions or teaching theology, but may not be specialists in teaching Eastern religion in the South African context, which is what I would be speaking about. So I always think it's a good idea to have one slide that gives some context. Tell us something about education in South Africa, particularly higher education. What are some of the key challenges? Lay the ground of what your presentation is going to be about, so that it doesn't matter where people are from, they're kind of located into your discussion. Sometimes this is a good place to put in 1 or 2 references, because there might be some key people who've been working in this area, and you're going to be bouncing off against some of their ideas. So here would be a good place to put 1 or 2 references to some key authors. Then it's always useful to give an outline of your methodology. You can't tell us everything about your methodology, but just in one slide, tell us, for example, you did open-ended questionnaires, it was qualitative research, and you met with 20 people, and you interviewed everybody in their mother tongue, for example. So just some key pointers as to what was the methodology that you used, so that people can understand what your findings were in the context of the methodology that you used. It can be really useful to give a theoretical lens. This isn't always important. Sometimes the type of research that you're doing doesn't lend itself to that. But where you can, a theoretical lens is helpful. In talking about a theoretical lens, again, this would be a good place to make reference to 1 or 2 authors who you've been working with in developing your own theoretical lens. You don't want to give us a literature review. You only have 20 minutes, and a paper is not the place to do a literature review. You might want to do something of a literature review in a written paper that you submit to a journal, depending on the type of journal that you are submitting to. But in a conference, we don't want to have a literature review. We want to get to the meat of what it is that you were doing. So the most important part of your paper is going to be to focus on your findings. So whatever it is that you were studying, spend some time talking about your findings, your overall finding, and then the sub things that you found that link to this overall argument that you're making. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing a research that is textual or research that is based in empirical research. Here is where you talk about your argument, how you come to make that argument, what are the different things that support this argument that you are making. And you spend a couple of slides working on developing your ideas, giving us the things that back up your ideas and your findings. Here, as you go through the different findings and reflections of your paper, it's a good idea to link this to some of the literature in your field. Again, you don't want to be giving us huge quotes from people in the field, and you might not even always exactly say who the different researchers are. What you might do is, for example, have a slide up of Pentecostal churches where you've got a picture of somebody exorcising the devil out of a congregant, and you might at the side put a reference to somebody like Birgit Meyer, who was one of the first people to talk about this phenomenon. So you don't want to spend too much time talking about the literature in the field, but it's good to give a kind of awareness that you know this literature exists, and this is the literature that has informed you. So in all of this, what I'm trying to say is your voice and your findings is what is really important and interesting. The work of other people is less important. In a paper that you publish, you will, of course, be referring to all the different people that have been writing in this area and be explaining to us how your findings relate to that of other people in more detail. But because you only have 20 minutes, you want to tell us your story about your research in a way that we can understand clearly, that is accessible, and that is engaging. So, in conclusion, you want to leave your audience, the people that have listened to your presentation, with something that they can remember. So in my case, it would be to remember that this is what makes up an ACE presentation, a presentation that is accessible, that is clear, and that is engaging. Ideally, end it with some sort of image that captures what your research was about. I want to move now to talk a little bit about how we use PowerPoint. So what you will see that I've done throughout this is I use words sparingly and I give lots of pictures. People tend to remember pictures, and pictures are engaging and emotive. So try and use a combination of words and pictures, and try not to write out your whole presentation as bullets in a PowerPoint, which you then read. Nothing is more off-putting for people than watching somebody actually read their PowerPoint presentation. When you do your presentation, you can either have your notes written down in front of you, or you could use the presenter mode on whichever PowerPoint it is that you're using, where you can actually write down what it is that you want to say with each slide. But don't make your slides your crib notes. People really get bored by that. They lose interest and you kind of lose people. But when you put interesting pictures up, it grabs people's attention. They want to understand, what are you going to say about this picture? And how are you going to unpack what is in that picture? And people tend to remember pictures much more than they remember words. The other big important thing is stick to your time. You only have 20 minutes. And I always find it amusing when particularly older academics get frustrated because now they get the 5-minute reminder and then they say, oh, I'm only halfway through this paper. No, come on, sunshine. You knew it was going to be a 20-minute presentation. Time yourself. Work out how long it takes you to speak for 20 minutes and what you can say in that. You're not going to get an extension of time. You want to use this time as effectively as possible and get your point across, which is why I keep coming back to this idea of having clarity about what you want to say. Try and get it down to one point. What is the key thing that you want people to remember about this presentation? Because let's be honest, one of the key reasons why we give these presentations is because we want to share our research with people. We want people to cite us, and ideally, we want to make an impression on somebody who might be an editor of a journal and who may invite you to submit your presentation as a written paper. So you don't want to try to give that written paper as the presentation in the conference, because you can't do that in 20 minutes. But what you can do is grab people's attention by the interesting work that you are doing and hope that that leads to a case where people remember you, remember your work, look you up, cite you. So a part of a presentation is also, to be very honest, selling yourself to your colleagues. You want to make an impression on people. You want them to hear your presentation and Google you. What other stuff have you written? Who are you? How can they contact you? What else of yours should they be looking for? You don't need to say any of this overtly, but it's definitely what you want to be doing in the presentation. Then how do you end your presentation? So I think it's always quite useful to end a presentation by saying thank you. That's always polite. Give your name and give your email address, and ideally have a picture that sums up what your presentation was about. Because as people were listening to you, they are thinking, I want to know more about what this person is doing. If you put your email address up, it makes it easy for them to copy down your email address and get in touch with you. A big part of conference work is networking, and you want to make yourself as accessible as possible. Now, I've not ever been very good at doing this. So this is what I'm sharing as somebody who's not been particularly good at ending my slides well. And I realize that it's something I should have been doing much more. And I hope that in what I've been saying, you found some things that are useful. In my presentation, I also hope that you have been able to have an example of how to do a presentation where it's engaging. You saw the format that I was using, and hopefully this sparks some ideas for you of what you can do in your own presentation going forward. So that brings me to the end of the presentation part, because I thought that it would be really useful if we opened up the floor for some questions and comments. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. Right, and I think then for questions and comments, we can just allow people to raise their hands, and then we can take questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Maria. First of all, it was ace clear. Can we say that? So, and probably also some of our senior colleagues should, take masterclass like that, because sometimes it really happens in conferences. Well, many times actually, that after 20 minutes of talking and reading their papers, they say, oh, I'm not done yet. So, and then you are here with your, the sign, -3 minutes, -2 minutes. Oh, really? Oh, no, I'm closing now, and then 4 more minutes, and so on. So I think it's really important, and I always said, I tell it to my students when I have the workshop, writing and presentation workshop in my classes. And one of the things we try to rehearsal is also, the timing. They have 5 minutes. They have to say everything in 5 minutes, and clarity, of course, and trying to be engaging, and pictures. And as you said, clear PowerPoints and not too many words, because it's really boring when you see, scholars and who just read the PowerPoints, without any pictures or anything else. But this is for the students specifically, and for younger scholars. So let's see if we have some questions. I'm pretty sure that, yes, Cherry. Hi, how are you?
Hello, Elisabetta. Good to see you. And
good
you
to
as
see
well,
you.
Maria. Yes, my question is, in fact, Elisabetta also just alluded to it, is whether you read your presentation or speak your presentation. So you speak to your slides. In the sense that, obviously there are some people who are very anxious and nervous, and so therefore type it all out and read it, and then sometimes also forget to move their slides on or whatever. And so my question is really, what would be the more desired way in terms of giving your presentation? I would assume speaking to your slides rather than reading it, because it gets a bit boring and monotonous. But in doing that, again, going back to what you said, Maria, is how important is it then to remember those academic nuances that you need as you're going along? If you've written it, you can type it in, but if you're speaking it, you may lose it. And so really, I'm just wanting some kind of understanding as the best method of delivery, I suppose.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful question. Thank you. So I think obviously the ideal is to be able to speak to your presentation and to be able to have some of that academic nuance. But we're not all first language English speakers. And, you know, when you are starting out, it's not always that easy to speak in those nuanced ways. So I do think in that case, it is helpful to write it out and be reading it. And then in the notes that you read, have a little point where you've got a note to yourself, you know, now you go to the next slide so that you remember to click to the next slide. I think one of my big things is also to try and not make yourself too nervous about too much of the academic nuance. Rather to tell the story of your research. What I didn't put into the slide, because I was hoping that it would come out organically in the questions, and it is, particularly in your question, Cherry. You're asking a question, which is something that I could have put into my presentation. And one of the things to learn, or to relax into rather, is you are never going to cover everything in your 20 minutes. And when people ask you questions, it's not a criticism of your work. It actually shows interest in your work and gives you things to think with. It's quite difficult for us in the academic world to really get into that, because academia is quite a competitive sort of space. And I know when I first started giving presentations, people would ask these really great questions. And I would feel so stupid. Why didn't I include that in my presentation? You didn't include it, Maria, because you've only got 20 minutes. And you know that you're going to have another 10 minutes of questions. And in a lot of ways, if you get questions coming out of your presentation, take those questions, whatever they are, as a sign that your paper was interesting, people engaged with it, and it's led to some interesting questions. And so take that as a positive.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks. Right. Anybody else have questions? And please, this is meant to be a space for us to learn together and to grow together. So there's no such thing as a silly question. It's more, if you want to know some more tips or understanding about how we could do things better, let me know. Ask away. And if you feel more comfortable, do put your questions in the chat. Ala.
Hello, Maria. Yes, thanks so much for your presentation. I just want to know, because as you present, some people might want to ask questions. Is it all right to allow them, or you should ask them that you want to finish up your presentation and allow them to ask questions later? What should you do? Which one is better?
I do think it's better to have the questions afterwards, especially because questions can throw you off. And sometimes questions might take you down a road that you don't really want to go down. And other times the questions might be about something you're about to say anyway in your paper. So I do think that while it does make it a bit more the sage on the stage kind of environment, it is easier to give your presentation and then go to questions and answers. Thanks, Solomon. Okay, now to you, Ala.
Thank you.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much for this really fruitful presentation and accessible and easy one. Now you have highlighted the main component of each presentation or paper, the research question, the theory, the methodology, and the finding. But you said no to literature review. I wonder if you just can clarify how much literature review and in which context one can include literature review, like in a case in which my paper try to make an intervention in certain debate. For example, is this case I could accommodate literature review, and where can I accommodate more or less, and how much I want a literature review in the presentation? Thank you.
Yeah, so another wonderful question, thank you. And I think what is really important is if you're doing a text-based discussion, you want to really be working with those key texts. So in some cases, you will be putting a quote up, which, you know, might be a lot of text. And you might even do that for empirical work, put a quote up of what somebody actually said in a interview. And those kinds of texts are just as powerful as putting up a picture, because, you know, that's what's key, that's what somebody is saying, and that's what you're going to engage with. So you may land up putting a quote, and it might be even a paragraph of a quote, maybe something that Max Weber said about charismatic leaders. And for example, you're working in Pentecostal churches, and we're seeing a very different type of leadership emerging from Max Weber's idea of the charismatic leader. And so my paper might really be all around Weber's understanding of the charismatic leader, and actually unpacking that. So there I would be really putting up quotes from him and be working with that, and then be going to other key literature. But what you don't want to do is spend time giving us a background to all the literature that is in the area. So you want to be talking about ideas, and then you want to be saying, okay, so maybe again in Pentecostal churches, Birgit Meyer and Greg van Dijk, for example, were talking about how Pentecostal churches were a reimagining of Max Weber's Protestant ethic. If I were giving a paper now about contemporary Pentecostalism, I would probably be putting these two people up and quotes from them to say how at the moment that is not what is happening. We're seeing a very different type of engagement with economics happening in these kinds of churches. And so it would be very important to put those authors up there and what they had said in order to make your argument against them or in line with them or a critique to them, you know, whatever the case may be. So there is a real place for the literature, but you don't want to give an extensive literature review. And often as emerging scholars, that's what we tend to want to do, because it's the area we feel a bit more comfortable in, and we want to look as though we've read everything. And so to this particular audience, I'm saying, don't waste your time telling us how much you've read the literature. All right, I think Aisha, you've got your hand up.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much, Prof Maria. Prof, I had a question about how going about choosing the most important things for your presentation. I think when you work very closely with a project, you tend to feel like everything here is important to be said. So does Prof have any tips on choosing the most important things to make your presentation kind of shine? Is there any like go-to rule, or how do you pick and choose what to leave and what to include?
Right, super question. So I would go with what is it that is new about your work? That would be my first thing. So is there something in my research that hasn't been done a lot of already? So let's say so for example, the paper that I'm going to present at the ASRSA conference looks at teaching Eastern religion from the perspective of humanities. And what I'm going to be saying is that actually some of the most profound literature to help us understand religions practiced in or on the subcontinent, the Asian subcontinent, comes from novels. But we haven't really used novels in our teaching of Eastern religion. So there I would be looking to a gap, something that hasn't been talked about a lot before. So the first thing is there something in your research that hasn't been identified by other people? Go with that. Secondly, is there something that's kind of a bit controversial in your research? If you've got the courage to pick that up, go for it, because that's always interesting. It sparks people's interest. And then the third thing is there something in what you've been looking at that can make a new contribution? So are you able to see things in a somewhat different way to the way a problem has been understood before? So is there something new, as in a new thing that you are seeing emerging in society? Is there something controversial? And number three, is there a different way of looking at a problem that you have picked up through your research? So you want to focus on those kinds of things and not give us the whole map of everything that you've done. I hope that helps a little bit, Aisha, because this is one of those wicked problems that we all deal with.
Thank you so much for that answer, Prof. Maria.
Okay, so I'm just going to go to the chat. The first question in the chat is, with your experience, what are some of the best tips to manage your time while presenting? So the first of my tips in managing your time is actually practice your presentation beforehand and see how long it takes you, so that you actually know that you're roughly within a 20-minute guideline. The second thing is I would focus more of my time on the findings of my research rather than spending time on the introduction, the methodology, the theoretical lens, and those kinds of things. I would move more towards the findings and try and make that at least 8 slides. So what I have as a rule of thumb is that I know I can speak for about a minute to each slide. So I tend to have about 18 slides if I'm doing a 20-minute presentation. So that's also another helpful rule of thumb, how to manage your time. And then I just want to go to one other question that I saw in the chat. So this is from Toby. I wanted to know, with regards to an unfortunate event where you ran out of time halfway through your paper, which component or section might be most useful to skip from the main sections you highlighted that are important? So if you have limited time left, my advice would be go to the key findings of your research, and then try and work from the thing that was the most new or interesting that came out of your research. And things that you find interesting, other people will find interesting as well. So often it's not just that things have to be new. Remember, the world is constantly changing. So if you are doing something on gender and religion, we live in a very different time at the moment to what South Africa was, for example, 10 years ago. So sometimes it's also very useful to contextualize your findings at this particular moment in which you were doing your research. Okay, and then I'm not sure if there are any other questions, if somebody wants to raise their hand or write any questions or comments. Okay, what I would like to do now, and please do raise your hand at any point, is to talk about the difference between giving a presentation and then writing your article. So in your research presentation that you do, you're really going to highlight the findings. You're going to highlight the stuff that is interesting. And I would suggest to not get too bogged down in trying to be overly academic about what you're doing. Of course, you want to be academic, and that's why it's important to say, this is my context, this is my methodology, and this was the theoretical lens that I used, for example. In a paper, obviously, that's quite different. And one of the big differences between a presentation and a paper is that in a paper, you will be constantly making reference to authors that you are citing, where your ideas are coming from. Whereas in a presentation, you may give a nod to the fact that certain people have influenced you. But if your paper is constantly citing varying different authors, it becomes quite tedious to listen to, and we lose your voice. So that's one of the big differences. In a paper that you present, we really want to hear your voice and your findings. In a paper that you write for an article, for a journal, it's going to be much more based in you locating yourself within the broader body of research on a particular issue that you are dealing with. Right, and then I don't know if, Elisabetta, you want to add anything else, or if there are any other questions?
So your tips are fantastic for the students, for sure. And I also, rehearsal, to practice at home is one of the most important things. And sometimes I do it even now, because when I'm not sure, I try. And then if I see that it's 10, 15 minutes over time, then you need to cut it before it's too late. So what I can also suggest to the students is to practice it. Probably if you have 20 minutes of time, practice it for 17, 18 minutes. So that you are sure that you won't be over time, right? And with regard to, I would like to follow up with Cherry's question. You can also think about an hybrid mode, to read from your paper and then to talk. But this is also something that needs practice. So especially when you want to talk only, right? You need to practice it at home and to know exactly where the next slide is and what is it about. So you have to have a very clear idea of your whole presentation. So you cannot, there are people who can improvise, and I'm very envy for about them. But usually it's the more natural it looks, the more work is behind everything. Yes. So well, this was really clear and fantastic presentation that you gave, and so natural, right? So but there was work behind it, right? It's not that you came here without, so okay, today I have this masterclass and I will improvise from the beginning until the end. So it doesn't work like that, I think. So it's always something that we have to work on, as in papers, right? Yeah.
And then if I'd just like to, go back. So one of the things I purposefully did was try to do a presentation that would be about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
20 minutes is a good time. Remember the adage in the days when there was TV with advert breaks, apparently programs would only be 12 minutes and then we would break for adverts, because apparently people can concentrate for 12 minutes. Well, that's what the TV gurus were telling us at the time. So the 20 minutes it's a nice length of time. People can concentrate for that length, and you can say something meaningful in that time. I just want to reiterate again, you're not going to be able to say everything, and the kinds of questions that you're going to get, don't see them as criticisms of your paper, rather see them as people were listening and engaging. And then one last little thing about questions you get from an audience. You will notice the more you go to conferences that people tend to ask questions from their own perspective. So somebody who works deeply in gender will generally ask a question about something to do with gender and the paper that you've presented. So sometimes when you get questions that are a little bit from left field, just remember that people often ask questions from the particular subject lens that they are most comfortable with. And that doesn't always speak directly to your paper, which case it's quite fine for you to say, that's a very interesting angle. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to go and do some more research into that area. I see we have a question from Lauren. So Lauren, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, mine is a practical question. Nowadays, when conferences are either a hybrid or online, and you only have like one computer screen and you're running your PowerPoint or whatever other presentation app that you have, I find that for me personally, it's like really distracting trying to keep my notes on the same screen and using the presenter mode. So I was wondering if you have any tips about how to keep additional notes, or what kind of advice can you give to somebody presenting in a hybrid space about maximizing their screen space and their workspace, just like some practicalities between shifting between these two modes of being. Yeah.
Okay, that's a fantastic question as well, Lauren. And what I've sort of got into the habit of, maybe because I'm of a particular age where PowerPoints didn't always work out as you hoped, I got into the practice of writing out my presentation so that it was on a piece of paper. And given the problems that we have with connectivity, load shedding, etc., I would strongly suggest that people do that. So you have your presentation on presenter mode on your screen, and you have your actual presentation written out that you're going to be reading on a piece of paper with you. What that means is that if you have to go to just your voice because bandwidth is a problem, you have everything in front of you and you don't need to fumble to find something. And if you're giving a presentation in person, you have everything in front of you and it doesn't matter if technology fails. So I am still, in the South Africa that we live in at the moment, a believer in plan for the worst. So for me, that always means, how can I do this presentation even if there's no technology? So that I've always got that kind of backup. And then you were talking about the online space. And one of the things that you can think about doing if you are reading more of your presentation and you don't find it that easy to connect with the camera, you can actually switch your camera off, have your PowerPoint presentation, especially if it's lots of interesting pictures, and then you can more easily read your presentation from your piece of paper and just remember to move yourself to the next slide as you get to the next issue that you're dealing with. And I know that for some people, that takes quite a bit of pressure off because they feel like they don't have to be in front of the camera. And let's be honest, a lot of people, when you do a presentation, they're actually watching the PowerPoint. They're not really watching the presenter so much. Right, Aisha, you have your hand up.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to ask again. I wanted to ask a question about tone and rapport with the people you're engaging with. Should you, or can you do things like icebreakers, or is it just like a purely academic tone that I'm here to present something and I head straight into it? kind of a thing. I'm just asking because I think sometimes when you break that fear of the people you're engaging with, it tends to be a bit more natural and less, I don't know. I think sometimes it's hard to just speak to people if you have a fear for speaking. So I was wondering about ideas on that.
Yeah, so Aisha, I think it's always wonderful to be able to build a rapport with people. And for some people, they are able to do that with, for example, a joke. I'm not going to suggest that we all have to start things with a joke, because for people like myself, that just doesn't work very well. And sometimes you've also got to be aware of the kind of setting that you're in. Jokes might not come across that well, because you might have people from so many different backgrounds that not always easy to find something that is appropriate. But one of the things that you can do, especially if you are a little bit nervous and worried, you can start out by just telling us, you know, this is who I am. I'm a postdoc student, or I'm a master's student at this university, and I'm going to share with you the things that I'm really passionate about. One of the things that you do when you give us a little bit of context of who you are, it also immediately puts your context becomes clear to everybody else. And people will be able to understand your presentation in the light that you are a master's student. And that's different to somebody who is possibly a full professor. So if it makes you more comfortable, one of the things that I would have as a suggestion, as a sort of icebreaker, setting the tone, getting yourself comfortable, is to say, you know, I'm a master's student, this is where I'm studying. I'm going to tell you about my research that is at this point. In other words, I haven't finished the thesis yet. I'm still in the process of doing things. And then launch yourself into what it is you're going to talk about. And that takes us back to that very first slide that I was giving you. So my picture was of a normal person and then a sort of superhero in the background. How do you take yourself as a normal person and take a normal presentation and make it into a sort of ace or superhero type presentation? And in that first slide, that gave you a context of what I was wanting to do. And sometimes it's really useful to put something up like the logo of your university and say, I'm a master's student at this university. This is where I am in the process, and I'm excited to be sharing this with you.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Pleasure. Thanks for the question. I think that was helpful for everybody. And then just to remind all of you that the people that you are talking to, I think one of the really lovely things about the world of people who study different religions in particular is that I really find this a group of people who are interested and engaging and want to help each other. So as you heard in the introduction, at the moment, I actually work as the executive director of our libraries at UJ. And it's a long story as to how somebody who's a professor in world religion gets to run a library. But when I go to library conferences, I don't see that same collegiality. And to me, it's something very special about the discipline that we work in and the colleagues that we work with. We're all passionate about what we do. And 99% of the time, when you bring interesting research to people, they are interested in what you are saying. And so I think also just take a bit of courage and confidence from that. The crowd that you are speaking to are interested in what you're doing, and they basically all here to support you.
Hey, Prof.
Colleague.
Hi.
Good, Prof. I mean, I'm still in another conference.
You're in another conference.
Okay, so Simpiwe came and went. All right, so I think, Elisabetta, that sort of brings us to the end of our time.
Yes. And Maria, thank you again so much. Maybe we can also take the advantage to remind that we have a conference, I mean, at ASRSA, so the Association for the Study of Religion in Southern Africa, and it will be at the University of the Western Cape on the 12th and 13th of October. And you are all welcome to come and to participate in the conference. Those of you who haven't already, registered. It was really, I mean, a great presentation, Maria, and we had a good turnout. I mean, we have about 40 participants, which is fantastic. Yeah. And I think we can, I mean, this is the first. I would like to continue with offering master classes to also to young scholars, and we can think about organizing more in the future. With ASRSA, right? So for now, I mean, all I can say is thank you again for your time, for your very clear and fantastic presentation that you gave to us, and see you very soon. And thank you everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you so much for the wonderful engagement. It's really been a lovely experience, and I hope to see many of you either in person or hybrid-wise at our conference in October.
Thank you, and have a nice evening, everyone.